I would have to take you all the way back to slavery in terms of the way our ancestors were treated when we were first brought to this nation. And when we were freed in the 1860s, and you take a look at the Reconstruction period, and we were led to believe that we were going to receive 40 acres and a mule and be treated like full-pledged 100% American citizens. We have a history in this nation of not being treated as well as others. And as you move forward, you get into the Jim Crow era and institutionalized and systemic racism, where there were federal and state and local laws on the books that allow authorities to treat us with indignity and without respect. You move into the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement, where there was Martin Luther King, who wanted to take a peaceful approach, and a Malcolm X, who was a little bit more militant and willing to say that whatever it took, the black man or the black community was going to do to be free, to be equal. So even since the 1960s, it's been a journey. And what you've seen this last year, or the last 5 years or 10 years, especially with video is now showing the rest of America what you and I have always known. Yeah. You and I have always known that police forces in our communities were sometimes stormtroopers as opposed to engaging in community policing. Sometimes, not all the time, not most of the time, sometimes. And each community is different. I grew up fearing police. Okay. That's why in the 1970s, I selected law enforcement within the Army, because I wanted to go back to Dallas and be a police officer, because I thought that if we had more black police officers on the Dallas Police Department, that we would have better policing. So that was my goal. So my fear of police caused me to go into law enforcement. And last tidbit, and you and I talked about this. When we talk about police, we have to understand that regardless of race, police sometimes are conditioned to view certain communities with disdain. There are black police officers who don't know how to treat black citizens with dignity and respect. Mm-hmm. It's because they're more blue than they are black. Mm-hmm. So the goal is for police officers, regardless of the race, and for citizens, regardless of their race, to try to treat each other with dignity and respect. Both groups want to be respected. And how do we do that?
Okay. What makes a police officer's job so tough?
Yeah. What makes a police officer's job so tough?
And I believe it is.
It is. A police officer has the power to take life. And they are put into situations that are chaotic, confusing, murky, and they don't always have all the information. A police officer doesn't know if he's dealing with a Thomas Cobb, who is an upright citizen, or with Jim Smith, who is a longtime criminal with a pistol in his back pocket, who has said, "I'm never going back to prison, I'm going to kill you." So as a police officer makes a traffic stop, he or she does not understand who they're dealing with. So we are taught to be overly cautious and to assume the worst. When we assume the worst about the person in the vehicle or the person in the home, we have a tendency to be ready to react to anything. That can cause the police officer to overreact. The reason I talk about compliance is if the citizen complies at the scene, that influences positively the de-escalation. So if the citizen can comply, that de-escalates. Mm-hmm. If a police officer can back up just a little bit, that de-escalates. But it only takes from 1.5 to 3 seconds for a citizen to to pull a weapon
Yes.
or to lunge at you with a knife,
Mhm.
and it's just a tough situation. Police officers see this every day, and over time, some can become numb to it. Not all, some.
Mhm.
Some can become jaded. Not all, some. The challenge is for police leaders to identify those police officers and get help for them, more training, or find another job or vocation because they're not good with citizens. And I'm going to pick on citizens again, Pastor.
Okay.
Whether the family, the church, or schools, we have to find a way to teach our young men, our young ladies, how to interact with police officers during traffic stops or in the community. It takes both, not just one. It takes both. But the police officer carries the burden and the weight of being the representative of society. When everything else is going poorly, the police officer is a professional.
Mhm.
He or she is the one who is supposed to know how to act. We can't blame the citizen. And in terms of compliance, there are reasons sometimes a citizen does not comply. It may be drugs, alcohol, PTSD, fearfulness, immaturity, or the person scared. A lot of different reasons. Why would a man continue to walk and stalk around a vehicle when police officers have said, but if he does that, the onus is on the officer to respond with the least amount of force, not to immediately go to deadly force. And that's the challenge.
You pretty much answered why you went into law enforcement.
Right.
This one last question is, my sensing is sometimes black men are viewed different than white men.
Yeah.
Sort of explain that.
Let's talk about that. I'm going to take you all the way back to slavery. Let's go all the way back to slavery. And when our ancestors were brought out of the hull of the slave ships, the local citizens would talk about how they stunk, how they were stinking. Well, those men and women laid in feces and urine on the voyage from the African continent to America. So upon introduction to America, we were viewed as lesser, as animal-like, as stinky. It started there. We were viewed as inferior people, as slaves. And since coming to America and being viewed as inferior, we've been on a journey trying to get people to understand that we are just as human as you. We have the same concerns that you have, and we want to be treated with dignity and respect. But America is a young nation, and we sometimes forget that. America is a young nation. We are still on the journey of trying to get all people to understand that we are your equal, and that's the challenge. If you take a look at how black people have been depicted in newspapers, television shows, and movies, if you take a look at the historical depiction of black people, it has been very negative. So as we look at the last 30, 40 years, things have become better, but we are still dealing with the historical and generational images and beliefs that people pass on to their children and to their grandchildren about African Americans. Let's talk about the doll test. The doll test, where you take a child and you put different dolls in front of that child, and you ask the child for words to associate with the doll. Children of all races typically will associate negative terms to the dark-skinned doll and positive terms to the white or light-skinned doll. They will associate intelligence and beauty to the blonde, blue-eyed doll.
Mhm.
They will associate anger
Yeah.
and ugliness to the dark-skinned doll. And that, the doll test, which was done decades ago, has been redone recently,
Yeah.
and the results are about the same. So we are viewed more negatively by some people, to include our own, because we've been conditioned in America to look at darkness or blackness
Mhm.
or African Americans and associate that with negativity.
Well, that's all the questions I have. If you have any additional information that you want to share with us, we'll listen. And if not, I have a few words I'm going to say because I think I need to preach a little bit, not much.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, Pastor, is that each citizen has two options
Yeah.
regarding police and regarding themselves. Regarding police, you can work with your local police department, your sheriff, and tell them what's on your mind to help them get better.
Okay.
In terms of being a citizen, we can teach our young men and our young ladies and our brothers and sisters and cousins and our friends to treat police officers with dignity and respect, to comply with legal orders, and to complain later or to sue later. So we can work with a local police department, and we can tell our citizens to treat our police with dignity and respect. Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you. Yeah, hold on. Someone want to ask you a question. We don't have many people here, but those who are here, if you have any.
Colonel Wagner, how should one respond when they're stopped by an officer while driving?
How should one respond when stopped by an officer when you're driving? Roll your window down, turn off the vehicle, and make sure your hands remain in plain sight, so when the officer approaches the vehicle, he or she can see your hands. When I'm pulled over by a police officer, as soon as I turn the vehicle off, I place both my hands to the side of the door of the window so the officer can see my hands. And when the officer approaches the vehicle, I listen to what the officer instructs me to do, and I respond. Now, if the officer tells me to do something that I think is going to be a danger to me, I'm going to have a conversation with the officer. For example, the officer may say, "Mr. Wagner, I need to see your registration tag." Well, I'm not going to reach into my glove compartment in 2020 for a registration tag. I'm going to say, "Officer, my registration tag is in the glove compartment. I do not feel comfortable reaching in the glove compartment. I ask that you run my tag to make sure that the vehicle is properly registered. I'm going to ask that you trust that there's not a problem. If you want to see my registration, then what I'm going to ask you to do is for you or your partner to open up the glove compartment and get the registration, because I'm not going to reach into the glove compartment." If the officer asks for my driver's license, and my driver's license is under my seat or in the compartment next to me, I am not reaching under my seat or going into the compartment for the driver's license. I'm not going to give that police officer any opportunity to overreact. If that means that I need to step out of the vehicle and he or she can handcuff me for a while and they can get it, so be it. Now, I need to be careful because every citizen has rights. And there are some citizens who are more aware of their rights than others. In some states, in some municipalities, you're not required to do X, Y, or Z. So if you want to tell the police officer or the sheriff's deputy that by law you're not required to do X, Y, or Z, and you've made the decision to do that, then do so. But be willing to deal with what happens afterward. So yeah.
Jay.
Well, he he just started to get into it when I was gonna ask him, what if the police start to violate your rights, you know your rights, and you know you're not doing anything illegal, what do you do if they start to get aggressive then?
Very good question. So what do I do, or what should a citizen do once a police officer starts violating my rights or a citizen's rights? There are situations where a police officer or a sheriff's deputy will violate your rights as they try to execute their duties. Sometimes it's by accident or ignorance, and they don't know what they're doing, and they have not been trained very well. Other times, the police officer or the sheriff's deputy consciously knows that he's violating your rights, and he's doing so because he thinks he's going to find drugs, or find an illegal weapon, or make a bigger case. So what do you do when you believe the police officer is violating your right? You can tell the police officer, sir, ma'am, you're violating my rights. I'm not going to cooperate. I'm not going to talk to you. I request you bring a supervisor to this location so I can talk to your supervisor. So the first response should be to ask for a supervisor. If the police officer or sheriff's deputy says, I'm not going to bring a supervisor to this location, then the citizen has a choice. You can allow the police officer to violate your rights and then deal with it with a civil lawsuit or an official complaint to the police department later, or you can try to stop the police officer from violating your rights on the scene. There are only a couple of ways to stop a police officer from violating your rights. One is through words, the other is physically through actions. My recommendation is to always use words and not to get physical. Use words, don't get physical. Because once you become physical, then all you've done is participated in the escalation of that situation. Let's be perfectly clear. There are some situations where no matter what you do, it's bad. No matter what happens, the police officer has the upper hand. All I want us to think about is try to be as calm as you can at the scene and deal with it later, officially or legally, and not on the road.
Can you legally videotape the police officer once you stop, or the police officer says, turn your camera off?
Can you legally videotape a police officer once you're stopped and the police officer tells you to turn your camera off? Each jurisdiction is different. And here's the challenge of policing. There are 50 states, several territories. There are county police, city police, municipalities. There are 7,500 different police and sheriff departments. So the citizen needs to find out the rule or the law for their local area and be responsive to that. Very similar with carrying a concealed weapon. What's true for Leavenworth, Kansas isn't necessarily what's valid for St. Louis, Missouri, or Denver, Colorado. So what are the laws in your local area? Find out what those laws are. Here's the good news. The good news is video during the last 5 to 10 years has exposed what we have always known to be true. There are judges and juries who now no longer walk into the courtroom and automatically believe the police officer. I believe that judges and juries understand that police officers are human, just like citizens. They're fallible and they make mistakes. But I got to circle back to the comment I made to Pastor Cobbs earlier. When a police officer or deputy gets up in the morning and they put on the uniform and they strap on their gun, when they go to work, 99.9% are not looking for trouble. Trouble tends to find them based on interaction with citizens.
Anything else?